Hey, it's Elwin Robinson, creator of Genetic Insights, and this is a Rejuvenate podcast. And I'm excited today to be joined by Dr. Miriam Mikitsky, our regular guest and my sometimes collaborator on various projects. And today we thought we'd do an episode on peptides. Hi, Dr. Miriam.
Hi, Elwin. Thank you so much for having me again.
So always a pleasure. So we've done a few episodes before on peptides where I've talked about, the theory, what they are, the difference between what I call supplemental peptides and bioregulators. So I don't think we need to cover that, but the reason I wanted to, because we've done it before and I highly recommend people check out those episodes, there will be a link in the description. But I wanted to do with Dr. Miriam more than the theory is talk about her practice. So first of all, we'll talk a little bit about her background with peptides and how she got into it. And then we'll talk about all her favorite peptides. We'll talk about how she uses them, how much she uses, what the downsides are, what the benefits are, some, anecdotes, some experiences. So this is going to be a very much a clinical experience kind of episode.
No, definitely. And I would start by saying that, the realm of peptides, it's been around for a long time, and I don't think they've been used in the medical community for that long. So, when I first started to get interested in peptides, I felt like I was going on a lot of bodybuilding forums and sort of random sites, and was quite fascinated because in general that is a demographic where people are losing weight and then putting muscle mass on. So in terms of just particularly from a metabolic point of view, it was quite an interesting field. But then on the other hand, I would say that cohort is sometimes willing to take more risks than I would accept in a medical practice.
Mm. Yeah, reckless is the word that I thought about it sometimes. And, fair enough, right? Both you and I have admiration for researchers and people willing to push the envelope and try new things. And a lot of breakthroughs do happen in that area, and that's great. But yes, it's not necessarily who you want to take advice from about dosing and stuff like that. So that's exactly why we have you on, because you've also, done the background work to find out what is actually safe and what is reasonable and all the rest of it. So, did you do any kind of training in it or after that?
Yes, so actually, it was my mother is also a medical doctor, and I think now the less she works, the more she's just researching and reading things. So it was a few years back that she started talking to me about peptides, and I was a bit like, oh, okay, peptides like semaglutide and those sorts of medicines, and she was like, well, sort of, but actually, it's a much bigger field, and that's where and I then enrolled in, there was a peptide certification that was offered by the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine. And I think, and so they had sort of two modules where they started to speak a bit about peptides from I would say more an American perspective, where there were compounding pharmacies then in the US that were making these peptides. So there was a little bit more quality control. And, unfortunately, then I was like, oh, great. So now how do I translate that to the UK or to Europe, where we don't have compounding pharmacies doing these peptides? But from the perspective of education and just having an idea of purity of peptides and their uses, I was really fascinated by what I heard.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, okay, so I guess let's get straight into it. I think we're going to start with some of the most tried and true impressive peptides and share your experience, and then we'll go into more, what's the word, cutting edge or new peptides, and we'll talk about those as well. So let's start with your favorites. What are the ones that are like your go-to peptides? And I just want to say, like, even working with you, because we sometimes work together with clients, I've noticed that like you're quite quick to think of, oh, we should recommend this peptide to someone, whereas me, despite having done several videos on it, I actually don't often think of it. But so I know that it's very much in the forefront of your mind that peptides can be helpful. So yeah, what do you find the most helpful peptides?
For me, the most helpful peptides have also been the ones that I've used the longest, and then I've also heard other practitioners use the longest, because then it gives me a bit more confidence in them being safe. And so, I actually initially started just to use oral peptides in my practice. There's a a company in the US called Integrative Peptides, and the founder of that is also very much associated now with the International Peptide Society and is a medical doctor. So they make a range of oral peptides, BPC157. That was the sort of first one that I became familiar with. Because again, I see a lot of patients with digestive issues, and that's one where you can actually there is some benefit in taking an oral peptide for gut lining health.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it's actually created naturally in the stomach, right? It's one of the things that protects the stomach from its own highly corrosive acid.
Exactly. I mean, that's the other thing is, most peptides are actually, your body produces either the same compound, because again, peptides are just amino acid sequences, but in small amounts. And, we know that BPC157, that production does decrease as you age. But even, looking at some of the research, a lot of it wasn't new. It was actually done, in the 80s, and they were already talking about BPC157 a long time ago.
And so, but yeah, I mean, what you bring up about the oral thing is a good point. I think some people say that they're not, very effective generally, peptides orally, and some people even say that about BPC157. So what's your experience of that? Is it effective? Does it help people?
I have found, I think this is where the sourcing is quite important, because I found, particularly the integrative peptide formulation, I have found that to be effective. But I was trying a few different vendors, and I would say that some of them, my patients weren't seeing effects. So I think that's where the sourcing has to be quite important. But the other, just to add on that, the other caveat though is that I would say that the oral peptides that I've really only been able to find good ones in the US have come at a much higher price point, whereas actually practicing in the UK, I've actually found good sources of injectable peptides at a actually much better price point. And I have found that injectable BPC157 does seem to really help with gut issues, as well as more systemic issues, more things like musculoskeletal injuries, and just generally for lowering inflammation.
Well, let's talk about injection for a second then, because I know that is a big thing where a bunch of people will not do that no matter what. And obviously, I imagine a bunch of your patients fall in that category. Maybe not no matter what, maybe they would if they had to with insulin, but they'll avoid it at all costs. A lot of people are afraid of needles. So to you, let's say for the average person, maybe, is it worth considering getting into injectable peptides? Given and also given the risks, maybe people are worried that they're gonna, infect themselves or inject themselves with something that's, because obviously if you eat something that's contaminated, you're probably going to be okay unless it's really, really toxic. Whereas if you inject something that's contaminated inside yourself, like your immune system doesn't have that barrier towards it. So I think people have a lot of concerns about injection, which are probably pretty valid. So what's your take on that?
I can definitely understand that, and I know when I was learning about peptides, I was also, quite quick to see, can we do it orally or through a nasal spray? Just because, just associate like teaching someone to do the injection is, for me, I was always worried like, okay, what if they don't clean the area? And there's always risks of infection or, somebody, I was just thinking accidentally hitting like a blood vessel and then they're at home. But then, the more I started doing it and then recommending it to my patients, it is actually, a lot of my patients then actually had lots of experience with injections, whether it was testosterone, insulin injections, women going through IVF. Like they were like, oh, I have no issues with injections. So actually, it was much better received by my cohort of patients than I had expected.
Interesting. Okay. So plenty of people are already comfortable with it. As you said, yeah, testosterone, IVF. Yeah, it's true. Okay. And so would you say then for someone who has access to both that injectable BPC is worth doing rather than the oral if you are, used to doing injections?
I would say, I've had better results with the injectables. I would say BPC157 is the one Maybe that one and Thymosin Alpha 1 have been the only two that I have found some efficacy with oral forms.
Oh, I've never seen an oral form of Thymosin Alpha 1. That's interesting.
It's the same company that the integrative peptides.
Okay.
They do one, but they're often out of stock. I think they're so I would say that that was kind of the one downside of it. But they offer actually both Thymosin Alpha 1 and also TB4, which is one that's often kind of combined with Thymosin Alpha 1. That one I would recommend, but most others I've generally recommended in the injectable form.
Okay. And so let's talk about Thymosin Alpha 1. That's one that was my favorite for a while. Like I, felt a good boost from that. So why would someone use that? Like under what circumstances would you use it?
So I started using it actually in my cohort of long COVID patients. And again, because peptides are a bit controversial, I obviously generally we'd have to kind of get to a point where we weren't seeing results with, I would say, the more classic functional medicine treatments, looking at mitochondrial health, gut lining health. And not that those treatments don't work, but, one of the things with peptides is that they just seem to work so much faster than doing the more, I would say, traditional functional medicine things, and so we would often reach a point where that person still had quite bad brain fog and fatigue, and then we could see on certain tests like mitochondrial tests or chronic viral infection markers that there was still a lot of pathogenic burden. And that's where then I would float the idea of Thymosin Alpha 1. Generally people, of course, some of them, their first reaction was just like, what, an injection? I don't know. But I'd have to say, like, of course, this is something that is, for research purposes only. It is a bit risky. But then I would say, like, more and more people are using it, and we have, I've been seeing good results. And eventually then I got sort of family members and a few patients to try it. So that had been sort of the first cohort that I used, but then that list has kind of expanded to not just long COVID, but general chronic fatigue, frequent infections.
Okay. Yeah, very interesting. And so what kind of doses would you use of that one with someone, in those kind of positions?
So, generally I've always started the dosing at the lower end just to make sure that it's something is safely tolerated. But so I've actually usually started with something like 400 micrograms twice a week.
Very low.
Quite
And that was
quite
still
low.
effective.
Yeah, and then if that first week, if that seems to go okay, I'll then usually increase to 500 micrograms twice a week. But that dose has actually generally seemed to be quite effective. Because I have had the rare case, and when we talk about downsides, I would say in general, peptides have been the area where I think I've had the least amount of emails or patients reach out to me to say that I feel unwell with this. But there has been, I've had a few cases where I was trying out sort of a trio of peptides, so like BPC157, Thymosin Alpha 1, and KPV for more kind of histamine type of reaction. And I this kind of made me change my practice a bit, but I had someone who was doing quite well on KPV and BPC, and then we added in Thymosin Alpha 1, and I wasn't sure if because that person had recently completed an antibiotic course, if the Thymosin Alpha 1, there wasn't really much of a pathogen to act on or to help, and that might have stimulated a bit of a detox type reaction. So they didn't feel quite that well on Thymosin Alpha 1.
Okay. Oh, interesting.
But that was like an isolated 2 cases, so not very common, but just so that people know that it's worth having kind of a plan of how you stack them together and which ones you use first. Yeah.
I've never had bad experience of Thymosin Alpha 1, but I have with KPV. I think my body doesn't particularly like, well, any part of, because isn't that part of the alpha melanos, I can't remember the name of it, alpha MSH, like it's a piece of it, I think. Well, it's a piece of melanotan, right, which is a piece of alpha MSH in turn.
Yeah, I thought, I mean, I know there's Melanotan too, that peptide, and also the, that I'm thinking of just melanocortin peptides, but maybe, you might be right, actually.
Maybe I've got it wrong.
No, you're right, actually. It is derived from alpha melanocyte stimulating hormone, which that one, to be honest, you're the first one who's told me that you've had a bad reaction to that. I would say that one is my best tolerated peptide.
KPV. Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Well, it's supposed to be anti-inflammatory, isn't it? But yeah, I never really liked it. Okay, so well, if I'm the exception, that's fair enough. So let's tell people. So KPV, what do you use it for? How much tends to work?
I mean, so for KPV, again, I've also, that is one that I've used daily, and I normally will actually start someone on 300 micrograms every day for a full month. And then I usually give them at least a like 4 to 6 week break, in which case then sometimes during that break we use different peptides.
Did you say milligrams or micrograms there?
Sorry, micrograms.
Okay, just checking. Otherwise someone's going to be really loading themselves up. Well, that brought me... Oh, so yeah, KPV I think is a piece of alpha MSH, which includes then melanotan, I think. So let's talk about melanotan. Do you ever use melanotan?
I mean, that's one that I haven't used so often. Again, I think, just because things like skin cancers are on the rise, and I always remember kind of learning about melanotan and how it could theoretically stimulate melanocytes. So I didn't use that. And I just, you always see those images of like bodybuilders on melanotan that are like a shade of, like 10 shades darker than what I would say would be natural. So I don't know, I just always stayed away from it. But I mean, I have of course heard that it is a peptide that can have some anti-inflammatory benefits, as well as be good for things like libido and appetite suppression. So, not necessarily against it, but I guess all practitioners sort of have their favorites.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I never had a good experience of it, but I think they call it the Barbie doll peptide because it makes you, more tanned, less hungry. So I guess that makes you thinner, and then increased sex drive. But personally, I was like, I don't need any of those benefits. I already would like more appetite and don't need more sex drive. So I was like, I don't know. It just felt like it was the opposite of something that I personally needed, and I guess that's the thing with all of these things, right? And you mentioned with the Thymosin Alpha 1 as well, right? Like for some people, it may actually be, not what they need. So I think BP157 is one of the only ones that I've heard of that just seems to be fairly universal, that everyone benefits because everyone could do with a bit of healing. But, let me just address this. But some people do scaremonger a bit about BPC157. They talk about the risk of how it leads to cell proliferation that you don't want. So what's your take on that, and what kind of amounts do you give to people that you do consider to be safe?
Yeah, and I think actually in addition to BPC157, that's sort of one of the big criticisms of your peptides that help with your own growth hormone release, that worried about cell proliferation. And I think if anything, there likely is a bit of a risk there. I mean, you can't deny that if you stimulate, if you're stimulating particularly like more of your own growth hormone release, that is going to potentially help speed up any sort of cell mutations that are there. But I mean, I would say with I think you're just somebody that should be having regular checkups anyway, because I don't think it's going to, you using a peptide is necessarily going to, cause a tumor to just to just grow on its own. It would have to be something that's already kind of underlying that could then be stimulated in its growth. So, and also the dosing itself is very, very small. And the idea is you're not supposed to be using these peptides all the time. So you shouldn't have that stimulation all the time. So I think you have to always, weigh the pros and cons, but I think it's one of these cases where people are thinking about the possible outcomes because of the science and how the peptides work, but I can't say like I've ever heard of a case where, someone can attribute their tumor growth from taking peptides. But maybe it's just been, that we haven't been using them for long enough.
Yeah, I think what makes sense, and there's very few people who don't need something healing, right? Whether it's their brain or whether it's their guts, as you said, or their skin or something. So it makes sense. There's plenty of healing to go around. Did you give us the protocol for BP157? So
No, I was going to say.
What's typical? What's the range? Because you said not to have it every day, so maybe we could start with that. Like, how often should people have it?
Well, actually, no. I mean, to be honest, BPC157 I kind of dose based on the issue. So normally I'm kind of dosing between 300 to 500, actually 300 to 600 micrograms. Generally, actually every day for a period of time, particularly if the problem is a musculoskeletal injury. Like just to give you an example, I tripped over this hose when I was running and landed straight on my knees, and I bruise really easily when I have that kind of an impact. And so I was using about 500 micrograms of BPC sort of directly injected sort of subcutaneously near the knee joint for a period of, I would normally recommend 7 days, but I think I did it for 5. And I think it significantly helped prevent massive bruising, and seemed to really help with just inflammation. And people who I have seen for musculoskeletal injuries, that's kind of the protocol I've used, about 500 daily for around 7 days. And then that I actually would feel comfortable with somebody using daily for an entire month. And some of the patients I've seen where it's been like a sports injury or something where they're very keen to get healed as soon as possible, I have actually done that for a full month. And then I usually pause it for 6 weeks again.
Okay. So at least as much time off as you've had on, then.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, that makes sense. And I think, we talked about this in our longevity episode a while ago about how, it's the art of balancing things, right? You were like using rapamycin, but then you were also using growth hormone or something like that. And they were, it's like the balance that's important. I guess that's case by case, depending on who you're dealing with, right?
Exactly. And yeah, generally, like I think trying to make sure that your peptides aren't canceling out some of the things you're doing with other supplements or medications. But that's why peptides, I think, are quite nice, because you definitely have that off period where, you then can sort of work on other therapies. And also people, I think, like the idea that they're not on something continuously.
I think one of my favorites, I don't use any peptides anymore except for one, which I'll reveal later, which I still use regularly. But one of my favorites for a long time was Thymosin Beta 4, and you did mention that briefly earlier. Is that also in your list of regular users?
Yes, I mean, I kind of, I would kind of lump the Thymosin Alpha 1 and the Thymosin Beta 4 together, but Thymosin Beta 4 is also something that I've used for wound healing and tissue repair, to lower inflammation. It is also one that I found can be very good for like muscle injuries.
Why would you lump them together? People generally don't. I believe Thymosin Beta, Alpha 1 is actually a fragment of Thymosin Beta 4, so I agree with lumping them together. But I think most people see Thymosin Alpha 1 as an immune booster, and most people see Thymosin Beta 4 as more of an anti-inflammatory. So why do you lump them together?
I guess it's just because I see a lot of patients where they do seem to have both, where they're like autoimmune, have a lot of inflammation, but then they're really suffering from frequent infections. So in a way, it's I guess in my mind, was just something that you could actually be lowering inflammation with both, but potentially avoiding like the Thymosin Alpha 1 from stimulating pathogen removal, like your immune system to remove the pathogen. It seemed to work in my practice, whether or not some practitioners might use different protocols, but yeah, I found that it seems to help, and it seems when I've done that, I haven't had any adverse reactions, whereas when I was just using the Thymosin Alpha 1, that's been one of the few times where I have seen a bit of like a detox response.
Genetic Insights provides cutting-edge, affordable DNA testing, giving you access to over 500 health reports that can help you in 3 key ways. They may be able to resolve your existing health challenges even when nothing else has worked. Using simple lifestyle changes, their reports can help you reduce your risk of developing future health challenges that you may be genetically predisposed to. And they can help you feel more confident in your health by showing you where you are genetically strong. Unlike most other genetic health testing companies, Genetic Insights tests over 83 million different variations in your genes, guaranteeing 99.7% accuracy across all of their DNA reports. They cover almost every aspect of health, including digestive issues, cardiovascular health, weight loss, hormonal and blood sugar balance, as well as nutrient needs, allergies and intolerances, and so much more. Using their system is quick and easy, and reading the reports is simple. If you've done an Ancestry DNA test, you can simply download your raw DNA data, upload it to the Genetic Insights platform, and within a few hours you will have access to genetic reports which give you a risk score for each specific issue and scientifically validated recommendations based on your individual genetic profile. Everything in your reports are based on scientific studies, and there are citation links throughout every report. If you are serious about optimizing your health and wellness and feeling great, then getting access to your Genetic Insights reports may be the most important health investment you will ever make. In the reports, not only will you gain insights into how to overcome existing health challenges and avoid future issues, you'll also discover which types of dietary, lifestyle, and even supplement protocols are best for your unique genetics. To get your unique genetic health reports, go to geneticinsights.co and use code REJUVENATE to get 20% off today. That's geneticinsights.co using coupon code REJUVENATE to get 20% off today.
I don't know if you knew this, or maybe you and I talked about it before, but Thymosin Beta 4 is actually good also for detoxifying some heavy metals, including lead, which is why I started using it more regularly. Discovered that in some obscure research paper, so that could account for yet another benefit, I guess. But I think those two that you just said, like they're both created by the thymus, right? And the thymus is generally atrophied in people by the time they're, 30 or something like that? Maybe not atrophied, but like much, much smaller and less capable of functioning, I believe. Is that right?
No, exactly. And actually, that's been one of the peptide bioregulators that I've used the most, has been the thymus bioregulator for that purpose. That again, your thymus is atrophying or atrophied, depending on when you start to use these. But yes, I think that can play a role of why we do see these rises in autoimmune diseases after kind of peaking generally in, I'd say, more like mid-20s, where maybe that atrophying process is starting, and then more so kind of in, well, for women at least, postmenopausal, where I think you have the hormone balance, plus by that point the thymus is effectively gone.
Interesting. So, okay. And all right, let's talk about bioregulators then, right? Because that's the whole, I call everything that we talked about so far supplemental peptides, just in the sense that like your body would make it itself, and you're kind of making up for the fact your body isn't making, the amount that you want. But the bioregulators are different, right? Do you want to explain in your words, like how, what they do, why they're different?
So peptide bioregulators are generally derived from organ meats, at least the natural ones, which tend to be the ones that I have used. And they're supposed to be, it's almost as if you took a glandular, but then took, peptide sequences and amino acid sequences from that glandular. And those are supposed to then bind to your own receptors and promote healing of that organ. And so they've been used for things like adrenal gland, to help with kind of depleted adrenal glands, thyroid glands, even things like the ovaries. There are ovarian bioregulators. And again, I was a little bit skeptical when I started reading about this, but a lot of this research again also came from the 70s and 80s. In the kind of Soviet Union research, where they were trying to find solutions for athletes or astronauts who had a lot of destruction and atrophy of their organs. So I was just quite fascinated by that research, and I've always found actually glandular supplements to be particularly nourishing for many of my patients. So it piqued my interest, and I've used them.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, the glandular thing, there's a theory that's one of the reasons why glandular supplements can help people, because they contain these peptides which are naturally in the glands. So then these bioregulator peptides, what the Russians did is they kind of isolated the peptides from the glands, and then they sell that as a supplement in various forms. They're sometimes also called Kavinsin peptides, right, from the guy who is the creator of them. And so in Russia, there's a lot of research that shows that it can have all kinds of miraculous results. Some people are a little bit skeptical because I don't know, some kind of bigotry or whatever, because it's in Russia. So what's your experience? Can you tell us any stories about any bioregulator peptides where it did have a noticeable result in someone?
Mainly, I would say the adrenal bioregulators, and that's been even the 10-day course where people took the 2 capsules a day for 10 days. I remember a couple of patients sort of emailing me, because I didn't quite go into. I told them what it was, but it wasn't sort of a long conversation. And then I got some emails back just saying what was in those, because I definitely felt like a big boost after I took those. Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
I think another case is I had a patient with Hashimoto's, where she was also postpartum, and we were worried about her thyroid antibodies, because they'd classically always been quite elevated no matter what we did, even though she actually felt fairly well in herself. But she had something like a decline from about 1,500 TPO antibodies to 200, and this was just in taking one course of the thyroid bioregulator for 10 days, and that appeared, we thought, was maybe a laboratory issue, so we then repeated them, but they still seemed to stay quite low.
Interesting. I'll tell you a couple of success stories as well. I will say, with the thyroid one, for instance, I tried it for ages and it made no difference. My thyroid didn't get any better. But then I kind of reflected on it later, and I was like, maybe it's because something else is causing my thyroid issue, right? Like some kind of toxin or something. And I guess in that case, maybe, it isn't effective. So it is case by case. But yeah, quickly I'll tell you a couple of examples. I had one client who had really high levels of anxiety, and they had all kinds of other health problems, but I really felt like it was rooted in the anxiety. So I recommended for them the brain bioregulator peptides, and they did it, and they said it was massive. It made a huge difference to them. They felt a lot calmer, and then a lot of their health problems got better as well, because, as I said, I think a lot of them are rooted in anxiety. So that's one example. And there was someone else who, when they tested, they kind of didn't have any indications of fertility, women in her mid-30s, and then she did the ovarian peptides, and then she started testing again, and it showed that she was fertile again. So with those home test strips. So I don't know what happened with her in the end, if she actually got pregnant or not. But there's a couple of examples of where there were tangible benefits. As you said, fairly short courses. So is that maybe one thing? Because I kept going on and on and on with mine, even though they didn't really seem to work. Do you actually recommend just doing one course, or a short course, and if it doesn't work, kind of move on, or do you keep hammering it until it works? What's your strategy?
No, I've generally, I have gotten people to do the month-long courses rather than the 10 days, especially if they're really having trouble with a particular area. But Also, from a prevention point of view, I mean, like I take them periodically, and I just cycle through various ones. But I mean, I also had high hopes for the retinal one for just for vision, and I was hoping that it would help my vision. But again, I think being stuck in front of a computer probably doesn't help. So it's kind of like, how much damage can you undo? So, I mean, I think for those of us who are kind of happy to experiment and add it into a longevity routine, I would suggest taking them periodically. But for my patients who are very kind of results driven, maybe a bit more impatient, or, don't want to spend for the bioregular peptides, if they don't feel anything after a month, I usually don't push it.
Yeah, fair enough. And most people don't have an unlimited budget, right? So I would 100% agree with that. Okay, is there any other favorites you want to talk about before we get into more of the cutting edge peptides, the less well-known ones?
Yeah, I mean, again, when I quite like MOTS-c as a mitochondrial peptide. I don't know. I don't really think that one's so cutting edge because, again, I think a lot of people know about it. But I will say, though, one of the things that I was recommending MOTS-c to people before I myself used it on myself, and that one for me was actually quite painful. As in, when I never really quite understood, because when people said that, oh, the peptide itself felt very painful, I was like, well, you are injecting, and I was always kind of questioning their technique, because I was like, okay, are you using the 0.5 ml insulin syringes? Are you doing it in an area where there's like a sufficient amount of fat?
You thought it was mechanical.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
But then I remember, like, I injected the first time I did MOTS-c, I used and I didn't. One of the recommended doses is 5 milligrams. And actually, some people do take it every day for about a week. I was just using 2 milligrams, and that one I just had a massive burning and just a pain that I was convinced that I had injected it into the wrong place, or I was going to get some sort of an infection. So it made me realize that, actually, it's not mechanical, maybe, for some people who mentioned it.
Yes.
Yeah.
I had that with Epitalon, and I tried it quite a few times, and even at a tiny little dose, like 1 cc of whatever, like a few micrograms or whatever, it always is just this sharp stabbing pain, and it's very weird. It's the worst pain I ever had is the only time I ever tried injecting GHK Cu. That was really bad. And I saw someone put underneath the video I talked about it in YouTube, a comment like, yeah, you have to like really dilute it massively. Like, no one told me that. It didn't say it in Dr. Seeds' book. So I just did I didn't even do a high amount because I always start with small amounts, but I guess it wasn't massively diluted. And that was probably like you just described, a really burning, stabbing thing that lasted for several hours and freaked me out. Yeah.
It must be very individual, though, because I've definitely heard that for GHKCU, and actually you had told me about that, and then I started making it a caveat to my patients, so I'd recommended it because a GHKCU is a good peptide for skin, for hair loss, and so I was recommending it, but I actually also, it's one that I haven't used personally, and so I had no idea that it could be so painful. And after I started doing that, people were like, "Oh yes, actually, that was quite a painful peptide."
Yeah, actually, let's talk about. Right, sorry, let's talk about MOTS-c. Actually, let's finish that. Yeah, because then I want to go to GHK. So you talked about 5 milligrams a day. I mean, that's a lot, right? Not only in terms of possible discomfort, but also in terms of cost. I think that's $50, $100 per 5 milligrams, right? So that's quickly stacking up. Is it worth it? Do you recommend those amounts? Do you recommend people do smaller amounts? How do you usually use it with people?
I've usually I haven't done to be honest, like, the cost has been another factor. So I've sometimes used 2 milligrams, and then I've tried. I do think it is beneficial to do almost like a loading dose, so you do have it daily for at least like 5 days. So I think the most common dosing I've done has actually been 2 milligrams continuously for 5 days, and then sort of twice a week for 3 weeks. so that you get sort of a month course. And then if someone has actually noticed that they feel, more energetic, or in the few people that I've actually gotten them to test like a mitochondrial test and then they've seen improvements, they're then often motivated to do another course, about 6 weeks later.
So you do see improvements when you do a before and after mitochondrial test?
Yeah, no, I have. And because it was one, actually, I would say personally, I didn't feel a huge amount of difference on MOTS-c. But I think, sometimes maybe we expect a bit too much from the peptides, that, they are actually supposed to be repairing things on a cellular level. And if then you're not combining that with sleep hygiene and, eating well and, not staying up late, watching TV or things, it's not going to mitigate that damage. So I had sort of taken it at a time when I thought my energy could use some improvement. And I didn't personally see like a massive amount of difference, but then, you sort of look back and are like, actually, am I maybe better than I was potentially? Yeah.
Do you think it might be more impactful because you're fairly young, fairly healthy, fairly strong, all those kind of things, at least fairly, let's just say. So do you think it would have more of a noticeable impact to someone who's more dysfunctional, maybe not the words, like who's more challenged, let's put it that way?
Yeah, no, I have. And that's where I have seen benefit. I think where it hasn't worked has been, where we think that the mitochondria have been damaged because of something, like a heavy metal or a toxin, and you actually need to really actively be getting rid of those whilst you're stimulating or trying to help the mitochondria.
Okay. A bit like what I was saying with the thyroid earlier, that, you've got to deal with the toxicity. And we've talked about that in different episodes. But some of the peptides do help with the toxicity, like I mentioned Thymosin Beta 4 earlier, maybe liver peptides, stuff like that. Okay, so GHK-Cu. So this is an interesting one because Cu obviously stands for copper. And, we've done a few episodes recently that's a bit down on copper. And I know that you're, trained in and a believer in the Walsh system, which tends to focus on reducing copper and increasing zinc overall. So is it counterproductive then to be kind of slathering copper all over yourself in these face creams and serums and all the rest of it? Or is the fact that it's bound to this GHK peptide mean that it's okay? Or what's your take on that as someone who understands both worlds?
Yeah, and that's actually one of the reasons why I was initially quite reluctant, particularly for the injectable forms. But, as we know, the GHK bit are the, glycine, histidine, lysine derived kind of peptides, and then the copper is attached. I would say, because I do check copper levels on many people, I wouldn't suggest it if we know someone has quite high levels of copper. But then for those patients where we've actually been able to bring down the copper, or they've been on a copper lowering protocol, I will sometimes then I'd say that actually the topical formulation should be okay. And then with the topical, it's a little bit less risky. So I've said, like, if you do put the GHKU copper serum on your face and you start to feel burning or irritation, that might actually be kind of your body reacting to the copper and a big histamine response. So it's probably not the best peptide for you.
Okay, makes sense. And what about, because some companies sell just the GHK without the Cu, and in fact it's usually cheaper. Is there I've heard the theory that copper is a toxin, and or in the amounts that it's usually present in, at least, and that the reason why people with high levels of GHK, Cu are maybe healthier or younger or whatever, have less damaged DNA, is because the body is effective at binding the copper to this GHK peptide. So it's really the GHK peptide is the good guy and the copper is the maybe bad guy. What do you think of that theory, and have you ever tried using just the GHK peptide on its own?
No, actually, I don't think I've encountered the GHK on its own. I definitely would try it though, because it does make sense. I mean, I know there's been a bit of controversy that a lot of compounding pharmacies in the US now can no longer recommend GHK-Cu. I think the medical system has kind of come after them. So I wonder if maybe GHK on its own is a way to get around that. But yes, I haven't seen it, but would be definitely interested to try it.
So no experience, but it's a theory you might be willing to indulge.
Yeah, but I have to say, I mean, I have seen, though, pretty good improvements in hair growth. Also, for example, post procedures. So, like for let's say women who get things like microneedling or lasers on their face. The GHK-Cu peptide is actually a very good anti-inflammatory peptide for helping kind of reduce the inflammation after that type of procedure.
Okay. And some theories, is that it's the unbound or free copper that's the problem, right? So maybe the copper bound to GHK is perfectly good and helpful to the body. That's maybe it's hard to say for sure. I tried that, by the way, the GHK-Cu serum on my head for, I think it was almost 6 months. Not because I care massively about losing my hair. I've said this before. I was never very good at having hair. But I just wanted to try it as an experiment. I did 6 months of it. It made no difference whatsoever. So that's me. But again, I think, there are some people who say that it helped them. So it's worth considering. But again, it's probably something that if after 3 months or so it hasn't worked, you probably should move on to the next thing, like microneedling or something like you said.
It's tough because I think for hair growth, it ideally should be used like when you notice a thinner patch or where, the actual hair bulb would still be alive and I think so I know, for example, or I have seen it successfully used like when someone who's had a hair transplant is then using it to try and boost the effects of the hair transplant. So it's difficult to tell if the peptide helped, but generally the transplants that I've seen have seemed to be more effective when someone has used the peptide before and after the procedure.
Okay, that's awesome. I just wanted to address the issue of, because I know some people listening to this will be like, oh my God, you guys are crazy. You're injecting yourself for things that give you stabbing pain. I wanted to run something by you and see if you had the same experience or not. So my experience is that the peptides that your body makes naturally that are 100% bioidentical, and especially I'm thinking of BPC157, Thymosin Alpha 1 and Thymosin Beta 4, I've never had like that kind of reaction to, like what you're talking about. Whereas the ones that are like not natural, because they've, like for instance the growth hormone peptide, like ipamorelin, I know they attach something to it because otherwise your body breaks it down in a few seconds or something like that. Like, so those unnatural ones, epitelon I think is that category as well. Those unnatural ones you're more likely to have a reaction to. Is that your experience as well, or not necessarily?
To be honest, from a theory point of view, I think your idea makes a lot of sense, but I've actually not had many issues with epitelon, tesamorelin, sermorelin in practice.
Well, I mean, MOTS-c is another example of one that's not bioidentical, right? It's like
exactly.
Yeah. But I guess I'm not saying that all unnatural peptides you react to. I guess what I'm saying is the only peptides you're likely to have a reaction to are the unnatural ones. That's the theory.
Yeah.
Done.
It makes sense. It's kind of like, when someone says that they have like an allergy to iodine and you're just like, well, that's not possible because iodine is an essential mineral that your body has inside of you and you need. So it must be an altered version or something else in the compound. So it would be the same thing with the peptides or your immune system being dysregulated and attacking things it shouldn't. But I agree that if it's bioidentical, it should be less reactive.
I'm surprised what you said that no one's reacted to those, because I think I don't think that's just me. I think I heard other people talk about that with the growth hormone releasing peptides and growth hormone releasing hormones. Not a severe allergic reaction, but just that you're more likely to have a bit of redness around the injection site and stuff like that. But yeah, so that's not your experience?
And actually, sorry, the redness around the injection site, I pretty much tell everyone that is likely to happen.
Ah.
saying that
But
I have, yeah.
even with BPC or something, because that's what I'm saying. I think those have tended to be okay in my experience.
In my experience, too, they have seemed to be okay, but I mean, I have had patients still, whether it was also kind of their own stress stimulating a histamine release, I still have seen redness with BPC.
Okay, fair enough. All right. Fair enough. Okay. Do you want to talk about the growth hormone peptides? Are they in your category of?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're worth talking about because I would say that where I have actually found them to be useful has actually been for some of my patients with sleep issues, and most of those are actually typically injected in the evening, and I've also noticed, so those are ones I have also tried myself, and I did notice like an improvement in deep sleep on like my Aura ring, and things that maybe it could have been another factor too, but I thought maybe there's something to it. And actually, they're an interesting bunch because I think they are a bit controversial because they are aimed at stimulating your release of growth hormone. Saying that, I think they are some people view them as a safer alternative because rather than giving exogenous growth hormone, it's more stimulating your body's own production, which is seen as slightly less risky.
Mm-hmm. And is there okay, so we talked about the big downside that people worry about with those already. If we compare it to actual growth hormone, because some people obviously take that as well, right? How would you compare them to each other? I guess that would be a question.
I mean, I sort of had recommended or at least been familiar with growth hormone prescribing before I knew so much about peptides. So, I have actually found growth hormone to be quite effective, but I sort of understood the risks that you could potentially increase insulin secretion. We know that it was something that could then be stimulatory for cells in the body. So it wasn't something that I was usually just using it for a short period of time. And I would say that's quite similar to what I recommend with the epitalin, tesamorelin, and sermorelin, that it's also that you're using it for, let's say, a month, and then generally kind of using it every few months rather than doing that cycle for a full year.
Okay. That's interesting. And sorry, you said epitalin. Did you mean ipamorelin there in that list?
Oh, yeah, sorry, ipamorelin, not epitalin. Epitalin's a different one that works more on telomerase. So yes, similar name though.
Yes. Okay, so yeah, so those are all growth hormone releasing peptides, I think, and then people often partner them with a growth hormone releasing hormone, like I think CJC 1295 being the most common. Do you normally do it that way, or do you like to have them separate?
I've actually always done them separate.
Interesting.
More so, again, just because I've had the few cases where someone has had a reaction, I then just prefer to separate them out.
Okay. And so, I've heard about like tesamorelin. Some people say it works really well, but I heard someone in this field, a skeptic, say, well, with ipamorelin, you're usually recommending I can't remember what it is, like 1 milligram, and with tesamorelin, they're recommending 10 milligram. And if you just use the same amount of both, then the ipamorelin's actually more effective. So that's, it's a theory. But in terms of those, in which case would you use which, and what kind of doses do you use of each, if you don't mind sharing that?
Yeah, so so just kind of on that point, like for example, tesamorelin, I was learned it to be more potent than sermorelin, and I'm usually using the ones that are less potent, again, just from could something be affecting insulin release? So I actually often don't use all of them together. I usually will pick one, and I will sometimes cycle them, but I think from the risk point of view, I've used tesamorelin less because it is more potent.
So
but
you think it is more potent even milligrams per milligrams if you compare like dosages?
I mean, I guess you're right, because the tesamorelin dose is usually a milligram a day, whereas the others are more like 300 micrograms. So you're probably right there that it may be just the dosing, but
That's what it is. Thank you. Yeah, I was guessing at those doses earlier, but there was a big disparity. I guess that's the key point. Okay, so yeah, okay. I don't think anyone's really looked into that for sure, but you tend to use ipamorelin and sermorelin.
yeah, more so those two. Ipamorelin I normally use, again, pretty low dose, about 100 micrograms per day. And then I will sometimes double that to 200. So I'm pretty conservative with the dose, but that's actually one that I've learned that you can use for a longer period of time. Some people actually are using it for sort of 3 months or longer. I don't know. I have a hard time convincing my patients to use it for that long, and so I've normally kind of capped things at a month, and then I like taking the break. But that's actually seemed to really help with primarily with sleep, and then lowering inflammation. And we think that maybe because someone is sleeping better, they're having then those benefits.
Interesting. Okay, so no one's coming to you for it because they want to get bigger muscles, or, I mean, losing fat. That's the other thing, right? It's more muscle mass and less fat. That's, I think, the most common uses of growth hormone from my or growth hormone peptides, from my understanding.
Yeah, you're definitely right there. That it actually, I mean, to be honest, in my case, more people are coming to me for it for just general anti-aging benefits. Promoting kind of healthier, muscle, skin, bones. But you're right, actually, the fat burning, the fat burning role is something that I probably wouldn't be able to comment on specifically on ipamorelin used on its own, but I have to say that in something where we are changing the body composition and people are able to then lift more and build their muscles easier, you will then see more of a fat burning mechanism.
Yeah, very interesting. Okay. All right, well, what's next on the list? Do you have some more? I know we wanted to talk about, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, speaking of like fat burning, 'cause that might be something that's quite interesting for viewers. I mean, should we maybe talk about like retatrutide and some of the GLP-1s?
Yeah, let's talk about retatrutide, definitely. We've talked about GLP-1s in a not that long ago episode, although we can cover it again, the semaglutide. But yeah, retatrutide is one I think I made you aware of a little while ago, right? I was asking about it.
Yeah, because you had asked me about it, and at that point, I hadn't heard of it. I was like, well, okay, now I've used more Tirzepatide in my practice, and then I was quite interested in retatrutide because I didn't realize that it was being studied with quite a few clinical trials that haven't been completed yet. So I thought it was just an interesting one where there was actually some objective evidence for it.
Mm-hmm. And what I liked about it, so I don't really like the mechanism of GLP-1 agonists, as we've discussed before, the fact that it makes your stomach empty more slowly, and we've discussed that before, the positives and negatives. And I know you do a very low dose compared to what's usually used, which I respect, and I think it makes sense. But what I liked about retatrutide, it does work in that mechanism, but it also works on the mechanism of improving insulin sensitivity, which is super, super important. I've just released an episode recently about insulin resistance, and insulin resistance is a root cause of so many diseases. So I was like, okay, as much as I don't like the GLP-1 agonism, I really do like the insulin sensitization. So that was a plus to me. And then the fact that it also speeds up your metabolism. So that's why I asked you about it. I was like, if people are going to take these GLP-1s anyway, this seems like a lot better version. And then the study showed, I think the average weight loss with like semaglutide, Ozempic is like 10% of body weight. And then with the retatrutide, from what I saw, it was like 20% of body weight. So I was like, so it's also more significant in its impact for those who really want to lose weight. So anyway, just to explain to people why I was interested in it. Yeah, so take it away, Dr. Miriam. What's your opinion and experience?
Yeah, I mean, I was, because actually, when we've talked about this a lot, but I don't really use semaglutide or Ozempic in my practice because I've just, most of the time, by the time someone has seen me or they want to see me for weight issues, they've already tried it and have had a negative reaction to it. So I was occasionally, before I found out about Retatrutide, I was recommending Tirzepatide because it seemed to have a little bit of a better side effect profile. But then, some of the side effects are similar to the semaglutide, and so I was.
Tell us more about that. I don't actually. Is it just a GLP-1 agonist again, or is there something else that it does?
So, Tirzepatide, my understanding is, yes, it is primarily GLP-1, but it also it does have. I think it also has some. It does act on insulin through the GIP-1, it is actually a GIP-1 analog, so it does actually help with promoting the release of insulin, which then can lower blood glucose, and so it's more of a dual action peptide rather than just a GLP-1.
Okay,
Yeah.
Got it.
But then, as you said, it's something then that would help to lower blood glucose, whereas the Retatrutide works kind of on both ends, so it sort of helps to prevent hypoglycemia as well as hyperglycemia.
Yeah, so it's potentially a very impressive compound. Ultimately, I haven't tried it myself because I don't want to lose weight, but someone I know well did, and still, I ended up giving them a supplement stack, which was more effective and didn't have the side effect of nausea. And I still don't like the slowing down the intestinal gastric system. It's not really intestines. I still don't like that element of it, but I still see it's way better than all the other alternatives like Ozempic and all the rest of it. And so I can see if people are coming to you asking for that, it's much better to give them Retatrutide, in my opinion. So what's your opinion on it?
Yeah, actually, I was surprised that maybe it's just been the last couple of years, but I'm seeing a lot more people who have loose stool and dysregulated bowel movements as opposed to just constipation. And so so from that perspective, I've actually found the Retatrutide to help because it appears to be slowing things down. And I almost feel like then what I've been reported is that then the stools are actually pretty well formed, and it almost seems like there's actually better movement through the system, no like undigested food in the stool. And I wonder if actually a lot of dysregulated bowels I found is more a nerve issue, and people who are really suffering with anxiety, fight or flight, their peristalsis is just not working correctly, and this sort of a medicine, perhaps because it is regulating the blood sugar, is just kind of balancing the system a lot better.
Interesting. Well, it just goes to show again, personalized medicine. This is thoroughly what I believe in. I've said before, I don't think there's anything that's universally good for everyone. Or, maybe there are a few things that are universally bad for everyone, I guess. But, certainly, so it just goes to show, generally I'm worried about it because if someone's already got slow motility, then slowing it down even more is really going to cause a toxin buildup. But as you said, case by case, if someone's actually the opposite and it helps to bring them back into balance, that can be a good thing.
Yeah, and I have found, I still, wouldn't want people to be on these medicines long term. So my goal has actually been, like for example, Retatrutide, the studies where it had reversed fatty liver in subjects. That was on the maximum dose, which is about 12 milligrams a week. So it is a weekly injection. I've usually started people on 1 milligram a week. Even 0.5, particularly those patients where I didn't think they needed to lose weight, but I thought actually their I actually saw that their blood sugar was all over the place, and I thought that this could be a good solution for actually helping anxiety, focus, because it really seemed that getting that under control could really help with those.
Interesting. So does it help in your understanding by helping with insulin resistance, or do you think it's more of a just insulin regulator, like keeping it more balanced, or both? What's your take on it?
It seems to act for both. I have to say that because I haven't been using it for that long, I haven't really done as many kind of direct comparisons before and after, but just from feedback, I have found that, I have found that generally I would say more working on blood sugar balance, because that's where I've seen the biggest improvements. But I have noticed that it really seems to be helping prevent that low blood sugar, which I think, the insulin would have a big role there. So it must be working on that pathway well as well.
Mm-hmm. And I knew someone who's on even less, like 0.25 milligrams of Retatrutide, and even that they said was effective. So I think you can use way lower amounts than they're using in these studies. Because there's the thing with modern medicine. One of the things that annoys me, along with many, many other things, is it's always like, what's the maximum we can give people without killing them so that it has the biggest possible effect? Like lithium is an example of that to me, right? Like a moderate amount of lithium will really help to keep people's mood balanced and all the rest of it. But they're like, no, let's give people like 1,000 milligrams so they have a kidney and thyroid failure and all this. It's like, why can't we just give a reasonable amount? So I feel the same way about a lot of things. Like, I think like you do about peptides at least, right? Because you're giving people generally less than is often used, and it's still very effective.
Yeah, and I found that, some of these practices, like, for example, like fasting or fasting mimicking diets where, they do have some longevity benefits, calorie restriction. Actually, some of my patients who are on Retatrutide are finally able to do that for, even just do one trial period for a couple of days, whereas before you would just get big protests of there's no possible way I could go like 6 hours without eating, and that's actually just had really profound effects on, some people have said I'm actually a much more pleasant person to be around, and I didn't realize that how like hangry I would get throughout the day. So it really kind of changed my perspective on how actually important insulin and blood sugar levels are, not just for metabolic health, which we knew, but for mood, and general like life quality.
I've come to the same conclusion over the last year or so. It's absolutely huge. Yeah. I used to teach like adrenaline, adrenal action is, your body's fight or flight response to threat and all that kind of stuff. And now I think it's mainly to regulate blood sugar. Like most of the time, if someone's having an adrenaline spike, it's nothing to do with the outside world other than the fact that they've, as you just said, forgot to eat or they ate the wrong thing and their blood sugar's low. It's as simple as that in most cases. Not every case, but in so many cases.
No, for sure. And it's just kind of funny because, you see, or I see a lot of patients have come to me for mood issues. And I think, you start to, think about it from a biochemical perspective of like your serotonin and dopamine levels, but often you forget, blood sugar, how important it is.
100%. Yeah, it's become my primary thing now for energy and, in fact, as you said, mood. Because a lot of time, especially with adrenaline, especially with anger, anxiety, but to some degree sadness as well. Like, to me, it's like lack of sleep, toxicity, and blood sugar. Not at least 90% of the time, if you resolve, and toxicity could be as simple as being constipated. But if you resolve those three things, good night's sleep, bowel movement, and a good meal, like 90% of it goes away. For the average person, I realize there are obviously extreme cases, and as a medical doctor, I'm sure you're dealing with people where it's not so simple. But as you said, even in your case, sometimes it is that simple.
Yeah, and I would say, I generally, when I use these compounds, I do, talk about bowel motility. So, before when I was using more Tirzepatide, I would generally recommend that people were having some fiber source, something like PHGG, or just making sure that they were prioritizing fiber in the diet. And also just having extra pancreatic support. So I was also recommending enzymes, just as a precaution, really. And I think that's something that it doesn't seem like modern medicine is doing. They're just like, oh yeah, you might get pancreatic inflammation taking this. And it's like, you could do better than that.
In an ideal world, you'd meet all of your nutritional needs in the form of vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients, and more from the foods you eat. However, unless you prepare all of your food at home from scratch using the highest quality ingredients possible, the reality is that most of us need some nutritional support. Most of us need to take supplements if we want to look, feel, and perform at our best on a consistent daily basis. And this is especially true if you have genes that give you an elevated need of certain nutrients. And this is where Feel Younger can help. What I love about Feel Younger is that they offer a huge range of quality supplements and healthcare products formulated and endorsed by Elwin Robinson, including must-haves like magnesium glycinate and vitamins B12, D3, and K2. And they do it at affordable prices with free shipping for orders over $50 without ever compromising on quality, purity, or potency. To learn more about how Feel Younger supplements can give your health a boost while supporting this podcast, please visit feelyounger.net and use promo code REJUVENATE to get 20% off your first order. That's promo code REJUVENATE for 20% off your first order at feelyounger.net.
I do recommend, and we're not quite finished yet, but this is why we're doing this interview, because sure, you can buy these things online. People often ask where I get mine. I do use like Limitless Life nootropics, for instance, and you can use code REJUVENATE for 15% off. And in certain cases with certain things, that may be okay to self-administer, but it is for research purposes only. That's what they sell it for, and it is far better, far smarter, especially if you're new to this, to work with a practitioner like Dr. Miriam. Okay, maybe once you've already, let's say you're used to it and you're used to cycling on and off of something, can you then source it yourself? Perhaps. But just to start with, to get that feedback, to get the support, to get the individual personalized. So sorry, I know it's not that part of the episode yet where we talk about how to find you and stuff, Dr. Miriam, but I just wanted to say how important that is. Is there any other peptides you want to talk about?
I think we didn't really talk so much about the Semax or Selank for more.
Let's talk about that.
We could talk about those because I didn't really touch on. I think another reason people are using peptides is more for cognitive function and helping to enhance concentration or help with the anxiety. So I could just briefly talk about those because I have used when I was starting to experiment with using peptides myself. I'm generally pretty healthy, so but I was like, well, you can always use better focus and better concentration, so those were kind of natural ones for me to try, and I have to say I do think they helped actually, but I don't like to use things every day for long periods of time, so I was also using them for about a month and then coming off of them.
Yeah, I would say I got a bit of a boost from Semax. I'd say it's a little bit dopaminergic. I say a little bit. It's a little bit compared to, a drug, but it's actually quite a lot compared to a supplement. It's powerful compared to a supplement. It's not that powerful compared to a drug, but it's pretty effective. One of the good things about Semax and Selank as well is that they can be used intranasally. I know a lot of people, as we talked about earlier, don't want to do the injection. I actually stopped using it though, Dr. Mary. I still got a bunch in my fridge, just because I found it irritated my sinuses, unfortunately. So if I were to use it at all, I would probably do the injectable version. But what's your experience with it?
Yeah, I'll tell you just. But do you have a good source for the intranasal ones? Because I tried, and I just, the ones that I had recommended for my patients didn't seem to help. So, but I was wondering, it may just be that I didn't have a good source of it.
Well, I've just said, honestly, that they irritate my sinuses, but honestly, I don't think that's the source because it's also, so I tried it from a Russian company because that's, where it originally came from. But the powerful one actually was the company I mentioned earlier, Limitless Life Nootropics. They do the intranasal. I found that it is effective. It has kind of sulfurous smell to me. It smells a bit like garlic. And so I think all those sulfurous things just annoy my body. But as long as you're okay with garlic in your food or whatever, you'll probably be fine with it. So yeah, Limitless Life Nootropics, I would say they do good. And they do two versions as well. They do an acetylated version, acetyl Semax, and then they do a normal version. And I think the acetylated version is supposed to be like longer lasting or something. But I found both, similarly effective, honestly.
Yeah, and I found, Semax I've only used as an injectable. I was recommended like sort of 400 micrograms a day. And I found that one to be better for kind of helping with focus and cognition, whereas Selank, which has a similar type of profile, I found to be better at just kind of calming the nervous system down, and more from, you can focus better because you just seem less bothered by external noise. So more almost like a anxiolytic rather than a strict like cognitive boosting.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought the mechanism of that is interesting because it's like it's a GABAergic versus a dopaminergic with Cmax. But it works actually by stimulating like B cell activity on your immune system. So I thought it was interesting that a specific type of immune modulation actually created this relaxing effect according to their own, understanding of how it works. So I never come across that before as a concept that stimulating B cells will like calm your nervous system. But anyway. But I would say it's mildly effective compared to, a drug, and highly effective compared to a supplement. I think both of them work. And as I say, if they didn't irritate my sinuses, I would use them more often. Or if I was doing injectables, I would use them, but I don't. So.
Yeah, I mean, I know with Semax, it is a bit shorter acting. So most people actually recommend that you're dosing it twice a day and dividing it up. So, I was using 400, but yeah, I guess dosing it twice daily was just a bit tough for me to do. So I kind of ignored that. But I would probably recommend my patients to use like 200 to 300 twice a day, and then see if they noticed benefit.
That'd be like, so, because as you know, a lot of times it's hard to get people to even take supplements twice a day, let them go out and inject themselves in the middle of the day. So why would someone be motivated to do that? I guess if they had brain fog and stuff like that, is that why someone would do it?
Yeah, I think, some of my patients who work from home, or they have like a period where they actually feel that there's a bit of a dip cognitively, they because it is sort of fast acting, they often would be able to do that second dose, let's say later in the day. But yeah, me, I would just forget, or it wouldn't work, because I mean, theoretically though, when you do the peptides, I know people are like, oh, it's such a tedious thing to do, but I find, once you mix it up, the actual injection bit is actually pretty easy. You can take the amount you need, inject it, and that's like you could do that in less than a minute. So it's actually not as bad as I think people make it out to be.
Yeah, I think if you're not squeamish, absolutely. And I did it every day for, I don't know, well over a year anyway. So I get you. But I think for some people, it's like saying a cold shower is easy. I mean, it's so easy to just go in the shower and turn it from hot to cold. But a lot of people won't do it because of the resistance. And I think it's maybe similar.
Yeah, I mean, for that, I would actually say, I know most people recommend injecting in the lower abdomen. I find that a bit more of a squeamish place for people, and I found that for those who are a bit resistant, doing it sort of in the outer thigh seems to just be a little bit easier for people to handle.
Oh, outer thigh, interesting. How high up?
I mean, I was just recommending, around, sorry, it's not very scientific, but kind of about 2/3 up. But I was just recommending people actually hold a bit of the thigh where there is a little bit more adipose tissue. And then, you're just using the 0.5 mil syringes. So that needle is very, very small in terms of injecting.
See, what I don't have, I mean, I'm not saying I'm super ripped or anything, but I don't have a huge amount of fat. So I don't really have it in my bottom of my belly or my thigh. But what I actually found is like higher up, like at the bottom of my rib cage area, I can actually just grab a piece of skin. Like, maybe I can show you like that. I can just grab it, where I can't do that lower down or anywhere else. So I'd actually do it there. So if you're watching this and you're as thin as me or thinner, that's something as well. Because as you say, in the belly, I mean, there's blood vessels. I don't know. It doesn't feel particularly good for me. I can't grab a piece of skin on my belly, but I can on this area here. Mm-hmm. So that's often where I do it.
Yeah, I think you're quite unique in that point of view, Elwin. I would say, I'm sort of similarly built in the sense that I don't have a lot to grab in the leg area, but I still find that there's quite a lot of muscle, skin there, and hard to, generally like when people do injections, that kind of outer thigh is sort of a safe area in terms of there's not many major blood vessels going through that area, so it's a pretty safe point
I need
to
to
do it.
visualize this where it is then. Maybe I should try this. I just can't grab hold of anything. It's just, hard. I don't know.
It can be higher up though, like just, so, but maybe actually you are just someone where there's just not a lot there.
There's just not a lot of extra skin. I'm not saying I don't have no fat, but there's no like skin to grab hold of, I guess. Okay. Anyway, that's good. All right, it's a great tip because a lot of people will have only tried it in the lower abdomen. And what else? Any other peptides?
I think the ones that one that I have, I would say when it comes to experimenting, it's usually been not really on my patients, but more either on myself or family members. And I would say, most of the family members who have wanted to try peptides, it has been more for weight loss or fat burning. So one that I have experimented with is FTPP or Adipotide, if that's one that you're familiar with.
I've not heard of it even, let alone tried it. Yeah, tell us.
But that is one that I actually did find some research on, that it is a fat burning peptide, and essentially, just to kind of go back, so it's officially it's follistatin related protein 3 peptide, and we know that the follistatin kind of family of proteins can help with lowering inflammation and tissue repair, but it's also meant to work on several signaling pathways related to fat loss. And
I thought it was related to muscle. I thought follistatin was the thing that stops myostatin, which is the thing that breaks down muscle tissue. So is it working via that, or is this something tangential but different?
No, you're right. It does work on the muscle but it basically inhibits myostatin. And so my understanding was that actually encouraged muscle repair, but muscle development, and can help actually with strength. But I believe that it then also it can. Let me just have a think about this.
Well, no, it makes sense because the more muscle mass you have, the more you burn fat, right? So would it work through that mechanism?
Yeah, there was something slightly different about it as well, where it would. I mean, maybe it was just by. Let me just. I can pause.
Yeah, you can look it up.
Let me just have a look, because. You're probably right. It probably just is because of how it works with muscle. But I think it can. So we know it inhibits myostatin, and then therefore can help increase muscle mass. But I believe. You're probably. I think it also can enhance fat metabolism through the way it modulates activin signaling, which also activins play a role in muscle repair. So it is kind of there's multifactorial in how it works, but it seems to reduce particularly kind of fat storage that's inflammation induced, which I think for a lot of people is a big factor, that kind of stress hormones really then act to help with burning. And for my family, most of whom are Eastern European, I think Polish people generally tend to get very stressed out and rage, and I do think that sometimes that like apple body shape that I've seen in some of my family members might be from that stress-induced fat storage. So it has seemed to actually be quite effective.
Oh, interesting. Okay. And again, I've not heard of this. So what kind of amounts would you use? How often?
This was one that actually I spent a lot of time looking up, because I could not for the life of me find a dose, because it was something that I came across just looking at peptides available through a distributor, but it wasn't on any of my like peptide certification notes. And so I eventually looked at the studies, but they were actually animal studies, not on people, and then kind of got a dose of about 100 micrograms per day, so fairly low dose. But I've been been really pleasantly surprised because I was actually using that one with Retatrutide for a family member, and they ran out of the Retatrutide, and I was panicking that then all of the benefits were going to very quickly disappear, but they actually continued with the FTPP, and it seemed to continue to kind of have that person then didn't deteriorate being off Retatrutide for about a month, which is what I was expecting. And so I thought that maybe by helping with that inflammation induced fat accumulation, it was actually, and helping to promote muscle growth, it was actually indirectly helping with the blood sugar as well.
Interesting. I'm surprised I guess maybe they have the bodybuilding community. Sounds like they'll be interested in this one. But so if you have used it for muscle building purposes specifically, let us know in the comments how it worked. As I said, I haven't heard of this up until now. Cool. Well, I think that's fantastic. We've given people a lot there, Dr. Miriam. If people have any experiences they want to share, please do so in the YouTube comments. And as I said, you could do your own experimentation if you want, of course. I have done it, but I much prefer doing it with someone who has that medical training, because you never know what will happen if something goes wrong. It's really good to have someone to be able to check in, and preferably, of course, someone who gives you guidance to minimize the chance of anything going wrong. So if people want to work with you, Dr. Miriam, what should they do?
Yes, so they can actually contact me. So the work that I do with peptides has actually primarily been through my longevity-based clinic, so Health Miro. So they could just find healthmiro.com and they can send us an inquiry. We do offer...
And that's healthmiro.com.
Exactly. So through there or through Instagram, it's also Health Miro. And yeah, we do free 20-minute discovery calls. I would say with peptides particularly, if somebody is potentially based in London or the UK, when I was discussing peptides, of course, a lot of people are quite nervous. So I was actually doing face-to-face consultations there, where I would actually just draw up the peptides in syringes and have people travel back home with like an ice pack. Obviously that's not possible for people where we're doing the consults virtually, but then part of what I like to do is kind of walk people through how to actually draw things up, where to inject, and it's actually seems to be, and then learn how to do it themselves essentially.
Yeah, very, very useful if you can get that in person, but potentially can also be done over a Zoom call. Well, fantastic. Thank you so much. And please let us know what you thought of this episode. We didn't really plan very much. I think Dr. Miriam quickly put together a list because we did this last minute, but I thought it's more of a conversational style where we're just chatting about these things. If you like that style, if you'd like to hear more episodes like this, please let us know, and please suggest some topics. What would you like me to chat to Dr. Miriam about? Things that topics that may be of interest to you. And please remember to like and subscribe to the channel, like the video, leave a comment on the video, share it with anyone who you think would be of interest. If you're a member of any forums on Reddit or Facebook or whatever who are interested in peptides, please post it there and ask them, what do you think of this? Share the message as much as possible. One of my aims, actually, even before I created this podcast and this channel, was to create the best training on peptides available, because there really wasn't very much at the time, and I still actually don't think there's very much that's very good out there. And so I hope this more conversational take, where we shared, especially Dr. Miriam has shared her actual real life experience, has been helpful for you, because as I said, I don't think there is a lot of content out there like it. So please show Dr. Miriam some love and appreciation in the comments as well. And as I said, if you are considering actually doing this and not just hearing or watching about it, then definitely considering reaching out to her. Although she's based in the UK, she has a medical license throughout all of Europe as well, and she can consult with anyone throughout the world, time zone issues permitting.
Yes, no, thank you for that. Those closing words, Elwin, and yeah, just to also say that with peptides, it's usually not something I'm doing in isolation. So whether I don't know, people would be interested in sort of hearing about particular cases where we use peptides plus other things, could definitely talk about something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So strategies for various things. I'm kind of interested to hear your take on insulin resistance with different modalities. Oh yeah, I was going to, God, I did a teaser at the beginning. Let me just finish on this one then, because I don't want to mislead people. I said I'd reveal what is the one peptide is I'm still using. So what I wanted to say is, honestly, the reason why I lost interest in peptides a little bit, Dr. Miriam, is I just found in practice, especially working with people, and I know this is not true for you, but just for me, that hormones just seem to be more central and more important in a lot of cases. People are interested in whatever, Thymosin Alpha 1. I'm like, yeah, okay, but you really need thyroid. Like that's the reason your immune system is not working. And I know you do both. That's what you were just saying, right? You don't use them in isolation. You do whatever people need. But the one peptide I do actually still use is a hormone, and it's oxytocin. That's one that I really enjoy. I was doing it a lot for a while. I was doing it every day. But the great thing about oxytocin is that the more you use it, the less you need it, because it actually upregulates your own production. So that's one great thing about it. So I just use it occasionally now. Also like to give it to people when they come round, like rather than having an alcoholic drink together. It's actually much better, to bond and have a good time to take oxytocin together than it is to drink alcohol together or whatever normal people do. So I'm a big fan of oxytocin. So maybe we could get your take on that actually before we finish.
Yeah, actually, no, I have used oxytocin as a nasal spray, and I mean, this is one that actually it's just recently that some of the compounding pharmacies in the UK are offering it as a lozenge, and I'm always a fan when like a pharmacy does it, because I know that there's a bit more regulation there, because I was a little bit dubious about the source that I had tried, and I do think it's one that should work very well. So if it wasn't working, I was a bit more concerned that it was the source rather than the actual peptide itself. But I think I think that's a great way to use it, actually, to get people to be friendlier and bond more. So yeah, you're
and I will say, and before sex is the other thing, right? When I looked at all the research on it, I was like, okay, this could be good for women before sex, but not really men, because it's like, maybe it's different for vasopressin, and maybe I was worried it would have a negative libido effect, but actually it's the opposite. It seems to be fantastic for both men and women, in my experience. And so that's more the nasal spray or injectable version, I find, because it's quite vasodilating as well. Whereas the oral ones I found are very nice, but they're more just nice. They're like relaxing and friendly, but they don't increase blood flow as much. That's my experience with those.
Yeah, it's a good point, because I think I have to say that, I mean, there's just an epidemic of low libido, and I find that, it's something that then patients sometimes don't really want to talk about, or they'll finally, when everything else is better, they'll say, actually, like, I have had low libido for years, but it wasn't really a priority. And then it's like, well, I should have kind of mentioned that before, because it is very important just for, relationships and well-being and things. So I think it's something that actually is a great thing to use.
And also for addictive, there's a category of people who have a genetic tendency for low oxytocin. I'm not one of them, but I have a genetic tendency to high cortisol, so that kind of counteracts. So I still think I'm a bit, lower oxytocin compared to optimal because of that. But I know some people, including a couple of people very well, who have genetic tendency for low oxytocin. And then when they take it, they're like, oh my God, this is what I've been looking for my whole life. Not that they feel indescribably euphoric, but that they feel normal. That's the latest feedback I had. It's like, my whole life I felt this emptiness, this like hunger that's caused me to do all this kind of self-destructive, addictive behavior. And then I start taking oxytocin and I just feel normal. I don't feel that pathological need that gets me involved in doing all kinds of things that, are a bad idea, including overeating, but also work addiction, sex addiction, drug addiction, gambling addiction, on and on and on. It's all like based on this feeling of emptiness that oxytocin really addresses. So I actually think there's huge amounts of scope with healing of oxytocin. It's also very anabolic. Saw this study that said that, trenbolone, like famously the most most effective but very dangerous steroids that really helps people put on ridiculous amounts of muscle. It massively increases the level of oxytocin, not just testosterone. So there's a theory that that's why it's so anabolic. So it also helps with muscle mass and fat loss. So I can't say enough good things about oxytocin. I think it's amazing. As I said, the best thing about it is after you take it for a while, you don't even need to take it because you've upregulated your body's own production of it. So yeah, I'm a big fan.
Yeah, I think, definitely in the future, now that I have a compounded source in the UK, I'm definitely going to be using it more in my practice. So I should have a bit more objective data. But no, I think it has huge potential. As you said, when we're thinking about particularly things like overeating, metabolic health, I think, you can work on your insulin pathways and your blood sugar, but that sort of dopamine, cortisol kind of addiction, stress pathway is something that I think oxytocin could help with immensely, and would be a good adjunct to what you're doing to help with blood sugar regulation.
Absolutely, yeah. It's not an alternative. They're both the blood sugar is kind of more primary, I agree. But yeah, it can definitely help. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Miriam. Again, check her out, healthmiro.com. Like the episode, subscribe to the channel, share the episode, and I'll see you next time. Hey, thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed that, I recommend watching our latest episode, which you can do by clicking above. And make sure to subscribe, like the video, comment, and share with anyone who you think might appreciate it. Thank you.